Jerry, how can we help you? You came back.
Yes, I came back. I felt like an idiot. I had one more question, burning question I wanted to ask you all this time, and I didn't.
Yes.
I forgot about it. So it's about evolution.
Mhm.
So I've heard you speak about it sometimes. So I was curious if you could reiterate your thoughts. Why are there any parts of the Quran or Islam that explicitly are not okay or reject evolution, and why is that?
Yeah, so when you say evolution, obviously evolution by itself is something, and then when you have the idea, the model of Darwin that was then, changed recently, and rejected many things of it, and then you got new Darwinism, and then changes, and whatever the predominant view of evolution today. When they use the term evolution, they're referring to that, right? They're referring to
Can I
mechanisms.
define it then?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so the way I think about it, and specifically what I want you to comment on, is the idea that through competition and through natural selection, you can have enough genetic drift over time that eventually this species becomes different enough over time where they can no longer breed with the previous species where they came from. So just that definition.
Yeah, so that includes many. It's not only one theory. Many theories would have this belief, for example, but they have different things because they can disagree. For example, on the origin, is it one origin or more than one origin? They can disagree on the tree of life. They can disagree on the specifics of natural selection. They can disagree on other things, but they can accept this, for example. But the thing is, in general, what is the issue that Islam has? So we can give like a parameter. The idea is that human beings came from evolved from whatever kind of animal or creature transitional thing. This is completely against the Quran and Hadith, because the Quran says Allah created Adam, fashioned him himself with his hand. Allah fashioned Adam, and then he breathed a soul into Adam directly. So there is no and then the Quran also says that his progeny comes from Adam. The progeny of Adam comes from Adam. So Adam and his progeny come from him. Adam created directly by Allah Azza wa Jal. And there are multiple hadith referring to that, of Allah, the process of creation, that he was creating in heaven first, and then Allah Azza wa Jal sent him down to earth afterwards. So it cannot be any mingling and mixing, because he was not even on earth at that time. He was fashioned and created directly by Allah Azza wa Jal, directly by him, and then a soul was breathed into him, and then he was sent down to earth, and then he had his progeny from basically a man and
this
woman.
Is in the Quran, what you're saying?
Absolutely, in the Quran and Hadith, both of them.
So okay, and to what extent? I've heard you comment multiple times about how there are certain verses that are like clear and explicit versus some that might be, well, maybe you tell me, can they be interpreted more metaphorically?
No.
Well, okay, because it's like when you say the breathe life into him, it's like I mean, I'm all for the idea that God can do anything; He's all powerful. But the how is still a mystery, right? Like the how God works in mysterious ways.
We believe that actually. So
yeah. So just because something is not understandable by us does not mean that it must defy the laws of logic, for example.
We don't play. There's nothing there. Is what defies the laws of logic there?
Well, something literally coming from nothing, besides the Big Bang, for example. Like let's just say God sets all the initial conditions, and He can kind of He's above time, so He can see everything, and He's all powerful. But the universe still has to follow the laws of logic. It can't just, a human being can't just appear from nowhere, right? There still has to be a way that it happens. You understand?
I just described the way to you, that God directly created him. So no one is saying come from nothing. We're saying God created him. And Allah did not create him on earth, as I just said to you. Allah created him in heaven. So Allah Azza wa Jal fashioned him. Allah Azza wa Jal says in the Quran directly, Allah commanded the angels to prostrate to Adam, and Satan also was there, and he was commanded to prostrate to Adam. When he did not prostrate, Allah Azza wa Jal said to him, مَا مَنَعَكَ أَن تَسْجُدَ لِمَا خَلَقْتُ بِيَدَيَّ. What stopped you from prostrating to that which I have created with my hand? So it's explicitly there saying that God created him with his hand. Allah Azza wa Jal says in the Quran explicitly, بَدَأَ خَلْقَ الْإِنسَانِ مِنْ طِينٍ. He started the creation of insan, of human beings, from a clay-like substance or mud-like substance. Clear cut, mentioned in the Quran. ثُمَّ جَعَلَ نَسْلَهُ مِنْ سُلَالَةٍ مِنْ مَاءٍ مَهِينٍ. Then he made his progeny from a liquid, which is essentially referring to the semen and sperm, etc. Right? Clear cut in the Quran. Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, هو الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة. He's the one who created you from one soul. وخلق منها زوجها. And He created its mate from it, because the narrations also mention the creation of Eve and how Eve was created from the rib of Adam. This is all explicitly mentioned in the Quran and Hadith. So there is no way, there is no room for metaphor there. Essentially, if you will say this is not literal, then you can say anything is not literal. I can say God is not literal, pray is not literal, this is not literal, that is not literal. So essentially, in Islam, or actually in every language, or in any basic logic, things are taken to their apparent, unless there is a reason that moves you into metaphor or allegorical meaning or whatever. So you take information the way they are. If I say to you, give me the bottle of water, you don't think I'm referring to, give me some, throw water at my face. you understand that I give you a bottle of water means give me a bottle of water, right? So we take language to its apparent meaning. Now, we don't deviate from that except if there is a reason. For example, if I say there was a lion given a lecture, now you deviate now from the literal meaning into a metaphorical meaning, because if you understand that the lions don't speak, therefore I'm probably referring to a brave man given a very strong lecture. That's why I use the term lion for him. So you move now into a meaning which is not literal. So when it comes to language, when it comes to the Quran or Sunnah or Hadith, we take the literal meaning of everything except if there is an evidence from the Quran and Hadith, not my understanding, because every Tom, Dick, and Harry can bring his own understanding from the Quran and Hadith that takes us from that literal meaning into any other meaning. And this is the case with Adam, and this is the case with evolution, or this is the case with anything in the Quran, not just this.
Maybe I could offer some way to reconcile this, because what you described, I don't disagree, but it is not mechanistic. And when you say that unless there is evidence, I would suggest that it doesn't have to be so black and white. The evidence might be, for example, evidence could be logical or scientific, that if something defies, some kind of science or logic that we know, then maybe we can incorporate it in a more extended fashion. So, for example, when you were speaking, I was thinking of, okay, God created Adam from clay. Well, when you say that, it sounds very similar to, of course, we don't know where life in the scientific realm came from, but all the theories out there speculate that it came from some kind of a chemical soup, okay? Chemical soup, after enough time, whatever. I'm not saying I believe or don't believe.
What came from a chemical soup?
Like the first cell, let's say, like you have this hypercycle of chemical interactions. They eventually start to, so that to me sounds like coming from clay. And after enough time, it evolves into a human. So why is that incompatible with what the Quran says that Adam, because God still had to do that, right? It's not like it just happened on its own. God was still the cause of all causes. He still had to do this. So it was still by his hand, by his, breath, all of those things. So why is that incompatible with, God just made a human? Why can't it be over time where a cell eventually turns, because this is, 99% of our DNA is similar to animals, so what's more probable?
Yeah, all right. So first, this is like a huge stretch. I think anyone who's just listening to this will know how big of a stretch it is. But to respond to you, it's not about what you offer me, because I'm not interested in this is with all the respect to you as well. I'm not interested in what you're offering me or whoever is offering me, because I'm not the one who sets the rules here. It's not like, look, this is, I'm going to give you some, I'm going to give you some ideas, and then you think about the ideas, and then let's change Islam now into this idea that it doesn't work like that in Islam.
I'm not saying.
No, I understand. But I'm just trying to tell you that when you propose something, it's irrelevant, because the rules of Islam are already set in stone. This is how Islam works. Islam is not where someone is going to come and present his own ideology, and then we're going to twist and change things based on what that individual thinks. There have been many people in history trying to do this. This is not something new. So Islam has set rules. And not only Islam, as I said, language has set rules. People take the apparent literal meaning unless there's evidence that leads you otherwise. And when it comes to the soup and this and that and science, let me just respond to what you said anyways. Now, the first thing is the soup, the scientific soup that they believe in, the brought at the beginning of life, has nothing to do with Adam. It's referring to a fish in the beginning. You have the first cell that then later on becomes a fish. And then that fish starts walking in the land, and then that land becomes multiple. That fish, sorry, on the land becomes multiple things, and these things become multiple things, and these things become multiple things. And then from a normal birth between two beings, you have Adam coming. You don't have a direct creation without mother or father, which is the Quran is describing.
Okay.
You don't have that. So that's the first issue that you would have. Second issue that you would have, that doesn't mean that Allah created you with his hands. If we were to accept that stretch that you made, doesn't mean that Allah created you with his hand. Allah creates everything. But when he says with my hand there, he's referring to a very specific thing that he's saying to Satan. Why are you not prostrating to that which I created with my hand? If Allah creates everything with his hand, then Satan will say, but you created me with your hand as well. You created everything. So Allah is speaking here about something that was special that Adam was given, that other beings were not given, that direct creation that was given by God. So now the stretch is not going to work for that second reason. And now the third most important thing is this. Is no need for, we don't have a contradiction that we need to reconcile, because science is not an objective reality. It doesn't give you objective conclusions. I do not need to change Islam to fit evolutionary paradigm that is changing every couple of years itself, and that is based on nonsense, because this is, at least that's what I would say, based on that long kind of a long lecture or whatever it is, or long introduction or presentation, if you'd like to watch on my channel. So when you have people faking science, trying to push evolution and this and that, I'm not interested in what these people have to say. Science have contradicted Islam before. And then science have changed to reconcile with Islam. Not that Islam would reconcile with science, but science changed to reconcile with Islam, because science is a changing thing. It doesn't lead you to absolute truth. It is something that changes, doesn't lead to absolute facts. It's just based on the data, the best data that we have conclusions. These conclusions can change. For example, like the orbit, the sun having an orbit. The Quran is saying that 1,400 years ago, changed very recently. So we're not interested with basically what evolution or science said, because it's not an objective measurement of truth. If I have an objective measurement of truth, this is an objective measurement of truth, this is where I need to reconcile. If I have an objective measurement of truth, which is the Quran, versus a subjective, ever-changing idea, science, I do not need to change anything. If it's contradicting the Quran, that would mean that this is incorrect. That belief that is being pushed forward in that science, which changes, is incorrect. It's as simple as that. We don't need to change and play games and try to do like many Christians did, by the way, right? Which have said, oh, everything in the Old Testament about the creation is metaphorical. When we believe in the evolution, we wholesale adopt evolution. We don't do that as Muslims. We say, you know what, Islam teaches this. This is what we believe, and this is how things goes, because we know this is perfect. Is unchanging. God does not make mistakes. Humans make mistakes. So when humans come to conclusions, their conclusions can be wrong, while whatever God teaches and says cannot be wrong. So yeah, this is simply the answer to the.
It leads me to just one more question. Yeah. You mentioned that Islam is unchanging, but there is as far as I understand, there is like a scholarly history of people that debate and come to conclusions about the interpretation. So,
not with this. Look, when it comes to Islam,
I'm just in general.
No, I'm helping you, because in Islam there's something called ijtihad, independent reasoning. If you want to translate it as that, independent reasoning, or whatever it is, or you have a scholar is looking at the text and trying to derive rulings or interpretation. This ijtihad. It is not allowed in any text which is explicitly clear. So in Islam, we have different types. Look, Islam is not just some basic. This is like
sure.
It's something as 1,400 years of There's something called usul al-fiqh, like principles of jurisprudence, in which we have text, and when we have different categories for text, we have something called sarih thubut and sarih al-dalala, something which is qat'i thubut or qat'i al-dalala. There are different categories for text. One of them is, for example, this is explicit clear cut text. Sarih al-dalala is explicit clear cut literal. There's no interpretation there. لا اجتهاد مع النص. There is no interpretation when it comes to that text that is قطع الدلالة, قطع الثبوت وقطع الدلالة, or صريح الدلالة. You cannot have but I think. So when the Quran, for example, says pray 5 times a day, no one can come. But you know what? My interpretation of 5 there is actually the celestial number of bodies on the. We're okay. You can go take your body somewhere else, right?
But where were these distinctions made? Were they made by the Prophet? The explicit versus unexplicit.
As I said to you, these are language, based on language. Language is taken as literal unless there is a reason that moves you. The Quran is revealed in Arabic language. Right. And this is the rules of language. This is the rules of the Arabic language. Things are taken literally unless there is a reason that takes you out of that. Therefore, we treat the Quran the same way it is in the text that is revealed in the Arabic language. Allah says, بِلِسَانٍ عَرَبِيٍّ مُبِينٍ, the clear Arabic tongue. It is in the rules of the Arabic grammar, of the Arabic language, of the Arabic understanding. So no, otherwise language have no meaning.
Of course.
Essentially, like, okay, you say to me, pray. I'll say to you, actually, pray is from the root word in the Arabic language, salah. And salah actually means connection. And connection means, that means connect to God 5 times a day. So I'm going to connect to God like a Buddhist 5 times a day and make up my own religion, you know. Prophet actually there does not mean an actual human being that was walking there. And by the way, these people who are bringing these nonsensical interpretations, I'm telling you, I'm not even making this up. That you got some crazy people on YouTube makes a channel and then try to bring his own understanding of what the text says, and it's irrelevant. We're not interested.
Well, of course, there is a tension there. That's why you have this whole school of jurisprudence. I mean, you know, someone still has to work these things out.
No. So the first book, for example, that was written in Principles of Jurisprudence was written by someone called Imam Shafi'i, who was very early in the first 200-300 years of Islam. It's a very early scholar. And Imam Shafi'i, he wrote that book for one reason. There's a piece of poetry that explains that. It says, وَأَوَّلُ مَنْ أَلَّفَ فِي الْكُتُبِ مُحَمَّد بْنُ شَافِعٍ الْمَطَّالِبِ. And the first person to author in Principles of Jurisprudence was Shafi'i. وَغَيْرُهُ كَانَ لَهُ سَلِيقَةٌ مِثْلُ الَّذِي لَا عَرَبِ مِنْ خَلِيقَةٍ. The people who came before them understood these rules naturally. So a Shafi'i, when Islam spread in the way it spread, you know, you got from China to Morocco, all of these Muslims all over the world, there was many people who are not understanding these principles. So these basic principles that the early generations already understood without needing to put it in writing, he put it in writing to make it easy for people who came later on. So the reason Ash-Shafi'i put that, not because of disagreements, these things were agreed upon. Ash-Shafi'i just put them in writing for people who are new, people who are, they're still not understanding the principles of Islam that the early generations already understood. And these principles you will see are derived from the Quran and Hadith, all of them. These principles that I'm telling you, all of them are derived from the Quran and Hadith. So it's not his opinion that, we disagree and I'm bringing that. He just put them in easier format, to put it simply, for people to understand.
Okay.
Right.
When you put it this way, it's, you have a talent for making these things more understandable. But
no, it's just like, I don't think it's about me. I think this is Islam, right? This is the teachings of Islam. If you just understand what Islam is, what Islam teaches, I think things become easy. Okay, is that it? I'll let you go.
Thank you.
No problem, Jerry. Okay, bye-bye.